It started with a yank, a sharp, humiliating tug that jerked 17-year-old Amara Daniels off balance. The handcrafted leather necklace her grandmother had given her pulled tight like a leash. The cafeteria at Westlake Preparatory in Northern Virginia, polished floors, glass walls, and legacy families, fell completely silent. It was one of those silences that doesn't just fall, it slams down. The hand responsible belonged to Blake Callahan III, varsity quarterback and heir to Callahan & Sons Development, the largest private construction firm in the state. "Well, well," Blake sneered, holding the necklace aloft like a prize. "Look what we got here. The new girl thinks she's a show dog." Laughter followed from his entourage. Chase and Ryder, always a step behind him, always holding their phones ready to record someone else's worst moment. No teacher in sight, and no student brave enough to intervene. At Westlake, power wasn't about rules. It was about names, legacy, and who could afford to get away with things. What Blake didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Amara Daniels had been trained for moments just like this. From the age of 8, she'd been waking up at 5:30 a.m. to spar with her father in their basement-turned-training center. His name was Marcus Daniels, a former Army Ranger, and now the founder of Resolve, a community self-defense academy that worked with schools, shelters, and police departments. Her mornings were for Muay Thai. Evenings? Krav Maga. Sundays were reserved for tactical restraint drills, what to do when the enemy was stronger, richer, and absolutely convinced they couldn't lose. So when Amara stood there with a collar tight around her neck, staring into the face of entitled cruelty, her calm wasn't submission, it was calculation. She was counting exits, angles, and phones already aimed like weapons. "You're gonna let go," she said, voice low but steady. Blake leaned in close enough for only her and the surrounding few to hear. "Or what? You'll call your little scholarship advisor." Amara didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The necklace, a cultural heirloom from Ghana passed down through generations, was never meant to be understood by people like Blake. To him, it was a punchline. To her, it was legacy. From a table in the corner, student body vice president Maya Liu stood up, one hand shaking slightly. "That's enough, Blake," she said, her voice wavering. Blake laughed without looking at her. "Go back to your books, Maya. This doesn't concern you." Amara's gaze never left Blake. "You sure you want to do this in front of 300 witnesses?" Blake smirked. "They're not witnesses. They're fans." That arrogance right there, that was the opening. One thing Marcus Daniels always said stuck with Amara. The person who controls the narrative controls the battlefield. And Blake had no idea just how out of control he really was. "Everyone's filming," Amara said softly, loud enough to reach Blake's ears. "You're holding a black girl by the neck, and you're smiling." The word black hit Blake like a flick to the temple. It hadn't occurred to him that the optics, his pale, preppy hands on her skin, meant something beyond a school prank. It hadn't occurred to him that in 2025, moments like these don't stay in cafeterias. They go viral. They spark investigations. They flip privilege on its head. Chafe stopped recording. Ryder swallowed. Still, Blake didn't loosen his grip. "I don't care who you are," he said. "This is my school. This is my town." That's when the tide began to shift. From across the room, Jalen Brooks, senior track captain and one of the few black students at Westlake, stood up without a word. Then another student, Amelia Torres, editor of the school paper, raised her phone higher and started live streaming. In 5 minutes, 200 people were watching. In 10, 2,000. And Amara? She stood still, letting Blake keep talking, letting him escalate. That was another one of her dad's rules. Let the bully dig his own grave, then hand him the shovel. "You know what I love about white boys with trust funds?" Amara said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. "They think consequences are for other people." Blake yanked harder, and that's when she smiled. Not a grin, not a smirk, the kind of smile a seasoned chess player gives before delivering checkmate. Quiet, unbothered. "This is your last chance," Amara said. "Let me go, or I will do it for you." Blake's friends urged him to back off. The room was no longer laughing, phones were everywhere now, angle after angle, documenting every second. But Blake, like so many before him, mistook silence for fear. He sneered. "What are you going to do, fight me in front of everyone?" "No," Amara replied. "I'm going to teach you. That's what my family does." And that was it. In one swift, deliberate motion, Amara raised her hands, twisted her body into a compact pivot, and broke Blake's grip using a Krav Maga wrist-release technique that forced his arm downward. His body, unbalanced and overconfident, buckled, and within seconds the boy who thought he owned the school was on his knees, wincing in pain, immobilized. No punches thrown, no screaming, just a girl reclaiming her space. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in stunned silence, and then applause, scattered at first, then unanimous. Blake, humiliated and red-faced, tried to recover. "She attacked me! You all saw that!" Jalen lifted his phone. "We saw you grab her first." Amara didn't gloat, didn't curse. She stood over Blake the way a storm stands over a town, calm after devastation. "You thought you were making a point," she said, "but all you did was prove mine." Principal Edward Hanley arrived 2 minutes too late. By then, Blake Callahan was already on his knees, cradling his wrist and sputtering a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Phones were still recording. Students still stood watching, some with jaws slack, others whispering as if they couldn't believe they were seeing it. Someone, finally, holding one of the Callahans accountable. Principal Hanley's eyes scanned the room and immediately landed on Amara, calm and composed, her back straight like she'd just stepped out of a courtroom rather than a cafeteria. "Ms. Daniels," he began, approaching slowly, "I'd like to speak with you in my office." "Of course," she said, then turned to Jalen and Maya. "Would you mind coming with me?" Hanley blinked, caught off guard. "This is a school matter, not a—" "It became a school matter," Jalen interrupted, "when a student was physically assaulted in front of half the senior class and no adult stepped in, so we're going with her." It was subtle, but Amara caught the look of irritation in the principal's eyes. The quiet frustration of an administrator used to smoothing things over quietly, suddenly realizing this wasn't going to be swept under any rug. On the way to the office, Amara could feel her heartbeat finally slowing down. That moment of adrenaline, the calculated self-defense, the restraint not to lash out, the tension of doing exactly what she'd been trained to do, had passed. Now came the real battle, narrative control. Her father had always said, it's not just about winning the moment, it's about owning what comes after. Inside the principal's office, Handley tried to establish authority, the way administrators do, by tone, by pacing, by taking a long pause before speaking. "Amara," he began, folding his hands on the desk, "I understand this has been a difficult morning. However, putting another student in a joint lock—" "Let's start with the facts," Amara said, cutting in politely but firmly. "I was grabbed by the neck, I was verbally harassed, physically restrained, and publicly humiliated. I did not strike Blake. I applied a safe release maneuver to escape an unlawful grip. That's not aggression, that's defense." Jalen nodded. "And it's all on video, multiple angles." Maya added, "Also live-streamed. I'd guess there are about 25,000 views now, and the local NBC affiliate is already asking for comment." Hanley looked visibly paler. "That complicates things." "No," Amara said, leaning forward slightly. "It clarifies them." In the following hour, the school descended into chaos. Parents began calling, reporters showed up at the front gate, a few teachers quietly told students to delete their videos before things got messy. But most understood that something irreversible had just happened. For the first time in Westlake's long history of wealth and whispers, the power imbalance had been turned upside down in full view of the public, and the girl who flipped it wasn't from money. She wasn't even from Westlake. She was a scholarship student from a working-class neighborhood with a father who taught her how to hold the line. Back at home that evening, Amara sat on the couch beside her father Marcus as the footage played across local news segments and social media timelines. He didn't speak at first, just watched, arms crossed, the way he did when evaluating a training session. When the clip ended, he turned to her. "You controlled your breathing," he said. "Your stance was tight, shoulder drop on the pivot was clean." Amara chuckled. "That's all you've got to say? I might have just blown up the local aristocracy." Marcus gave a small, proud smile. "And you did it with restraint. That's the part I'm most proud of." The next morning brought fallout. Blake's father, Frederick Callahan, released a boilerplate statement condemning inappropriate conduct while carefully avoiding direct apologies. But the internet had already passed judgment. Entitled "Rich Kid Assaults Black Student" was a headline too clean, too symbolic, to be ignored. By noon, Blake had been placed on administrative leave, his football captainship was suspended, calls were growing for his expulsion, and Amara? She was invited to appear on 2 national news shows and a podcast focused on youth activism. Principal Hanley, boxed into a corner, issued a statement to the press. "Westlake Preparatory does not tolerate acts of discrimination or violence. We are committed to ensuring all our students feel safe and respected." It rang hollow for many students, but Amara wasn't interested in empty statements. She was thinking about what came next. That Friday, she addressed the student body, not from a podium, but standing on a cafeteria table, flanked by Jalen, Maya, Amelia, and others who had supported her. "I'm not here to talk about Blake," she said. "I'm here to talk about the silence that let someone like him think it was okay to do what he did. I'm here to talk about why so many of us, especially those of us who don't come from privilege, are told we should just take it, stay calm, wait for justice. I didn't wait. I acted. And I'll keep acting." A teacher started to rise to interrupt, but the students clapped, first cautiously, then in a swelling wave. For the first time in its polished, legacy-soaked history, Westlake sounded like change. That day became a turning point. The Monday after Amara's speech, the school board held an emergency meeting, unprecedented in recent memory. Parents packed the room, some furious, others quietly supportive, all tense. At the center of the storm, Amara sat next to her father, flanked by a civil rights attorney who had volunteered their time after seeing the live stream. Not that Amara wanted to sue, her goal wasn't vengeance, it was transformation. By the time the board finished reading its initial statement, the damage control was obvious. "We're deeply sorry for the pain caused. We're reviewing our policies on racial sensitivity, harassment, and student safety." The language was measured, sterile, but none of it mattered, because the truth had already outrun the bureaucracy. Amara didn't speak at that meeting. She didn't have to. Her restraint in the cafeteria, her calm dismantling of an abuser's power, and her composure under scrutiny had already done more than words ever could. Her presence alone forced the conversation into reality. Blake Callahan was expelled by the end of the week. That in itself sent a shockwave through the student body. For decades, Westlake had existed under a silent rule: money protects. Rules are flexible, influence shields everything. And yet, here was the golden boy, permanently removed, not for a scandal involving drugs or grades, but for the far more insidious offense of believing he could dehumanize someone without consequence. It wasn't just Blake who faced accountability. His sidekicks, Chase and Ryder, were also suspended. Social media sleuths had pulled up months of offensive memes, derogatory messages, and screenshots from private group chats. The quiet racism, the kind whispered at lunch tables and embedded in jokes, was now in the open. But the most powerful shift was cultural. They started calling it the Daniels effect. Freshmen who had once avoided eye contact with scholarship students now reached out to form study groups. A junior who'd previously laughed along with Blake in gym class requested a meeting with the Diversity Council to apologize. Students began to organize lunchtime forums, creating spaces where real conversations about power, race, and silence could unfold. And Amara? She didn't seize this momentum for popularity. She used it to build. She founded a program called Project Grounded, an initiative that taught de-escalation, self-defense, and digital literacy. Her first seminar, How to Survive and Fight Back Without Ever Throwing a Punch, had standing room only. Her second, featured on local news. By spring semester, Amara had received offers from multiple Ivy League schools. But more important to her than college applications was seeing her classmates start to speak up. Not performatively, not for attention, but because they'd learned that silence is a choice, and complicity always has a cost. One afternoon, Maya approached Amara after class. "You know," she said, "I used to think Westlake was just unchangeable, like a country club disguised as a school." Amara smiled. "Turns out, even country clubs fall when enough people stop pretending." Jalen joined them, his arm around Amelia's shoulder. "We're renaming the peer leadership group," he said. "It's going to focus on advocacy, not just planning dances." Amara looked around at the students chatting in the hallways. There were still cliques, still wealth divides, but something had shifted. You could feel it in how students greeted one another. There was less armor, more eye contact. Even teachers had begun taking cultural sensitivity seminars, voluntarily. Marcus Daniels came to the school only once, quietly, humbly, after being invited to give a talk on confidence and boundaries. He didn't bring up his military career. He just told the students, the strongest thing you'll ever do is protect someone who thinks they're alone. 6 months later, on the day of graduation, Amara stood at the podium as valedictorian. Her speech was short, direct, and honest. "A year ago, I walked into this school with no illusions. I knew where I stood in the social food chain. I knew what people assumed about me based on my skin, my background, and the fact that I wasn't born into legacy. But what I didn't expect, what none of us expected, was that one moment, one act of resistance could reveal the rot hiding under all the polish. When someone tried to humiliate me, they didn't just try to reduce me, they exposed themselves. And from that moment on, we all had a choice. Stay quiet or speak, play along, or push back. I chose the latter. And I'm not sorry, because I didn't just defend myself, I defended the idea that dignity isn't up for negotiation. Not here, not anywhere." The standing ovation lasted over 3 minutes. In the months that followed, Westlake was cited in multiple educational think pieces as a case study in institutional accountability. The footage from the cafeteria became mandatory viewing in several diversity and anti-bullying training programs nationwide. Blake Callahan's name, once associated with privilege and athletic glory, had become synonymous with cautionary tales. His applications to several elite universities were quietly withdrawn. His father's company lost contracts, not because of some orchestrated campaign, but because, in the end, the truth had been too public to ignore. In Amara, she stepped onto the campus of Princeton that fall, not just as a student, but as a symbol. Her fight wasn't just personal, it was systemic. And she carried the quiet satisfaction that while she never sought revenge, she had achieved something greater, a permanent change in how a community defines strength, justice, and voice. Her father said it best at their last breakfast before she left for college. "You didn't fight to win, baby girl. You fought to change the rules. And that's how revolutions start." Amara Daniels proved something Blake Callahan never understood. When you try to silence the right person, all you end up doing is giving her the microphone.